In the frozen forests of Finland during World War II, enemy soldiers whispered her name in fear. They called her the White Death, a ghost who could kill from impossible distances, appearing and disappearing like smoke in the winter mist. But what they didn't know was that their most feared enemy wasn't the battle-hardened male soldier they imagined. She was a 19-year-old farm girl named Simo Heiha's protégé, though history would remember her by a different name entirely. This is the true story of how one young woman's extraordinary skill with a rifle would turn the tide of an entire military campaign, proving that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't the biggest gun or the largest army. It's the element of surprise wrapped in deadly precision. When the enemy thought they had every advantage, superior numbers, better equipment, and strategic positions, they never suspected that their downfall would come from someone they never saw coming. This is her story. The morning mist clung to the Finnish countryside like a prayer, and 19-year-old Lydia Litviak crouched behind a fallen birch tree, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Her father's old hunting rifle felt familiar in her hands, the wood worn smooth from years of use. She had been tracking deer since dawn, but the sound of distant artillery had scared away all the wildlife hours ago. Lydia had grown up in this forest, learning to shoot before she could properly hold a pencil. Her father, Mikhail, had been a hunter and marksman who taught her that patience was more valuable than bullets, and that understanding your environment could mean the difference between success and failure. These lessons, meant for hunting game, would soon prove invaluable in an entirely different kind of hunt. The year was 1941, and the German army was advancing through Eastern Europe with terrifying efficiency. In Finland, caught between Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia, found itself in an impossible position. Young people across the country were being recruited into various resistance movements, but few military commanders were willing to consider teenage girls as potential soldiers. Lydia, however, had caught the attention of Captain Erik Nordahl, a veteran of the Winter War who had heard stories about her legendary shooting skills from local hunters. Captain Nordahl had been skeptical when he first received reports about a teenage girl who could consistently hit targets at distances that challenged experienced military snipers. The resistance needed every skilled shooter they could find, but a 19-year-old farm girl seemed like an unlikely candidate for specialized combat operations. However, desperation had a way of opening minds to unconventional solutions. The captain arranged to meet Lydia at a makeshift shooting range constructed in a remote meadow outside her village. He brought his best marksman, Sergeant Anders Kortinen, along to test her abilities. The sergeant had served in 3 different conflicts and considered himself an expert judge of shooting talent. Both men expected to politely dismiss the girl after a brief demonstration and continue their search for qualified snipers elsewhere. Lydia arrived at the meeting wearing her father's old hunting jacket and carrying the rifle she had used since she was 12 years old. The weapon was a modified Mosin Nagant that her father had customized for long-range hunting. It wasn't military standard equipment, but it had been carefully maintained and adjusted for precision shooting. Captain Nordahl noticed immediately that she handled the rifle with the confidence of someone who had been shooting for years, not the tentative grip of an amateur trying to impress military officials. The test began with standard target practice at 200 meters. Lydia's first 3 shots formed a tight grouping that would have been impressive for any soldier in the captain's unit. Sergeant Korhonen raised his eyebrows but suggested increasing the difficulty. They moved the targets to 400 meters, then 600. With each distance increase, Lydia's accuracy remained consistent. She took time to read the wind, adjusted for elevation, and fired with the calm precision of a professional. But it was her performance at 800 meters that convinced both men they had discovered something extraordinary. The target was barely visible to the naked eye, requiring the use of binoculars to confirm hits. Lydia fired 5 shots in succession, each one finding its mark within a circle smaller than a dinner plate. Sergeant Korhonen had never seen shooting like this from anyone, let alone a teenager with no formal military training. Captain Nordahl realized he was looking at a natural talent that could be developed into something exceptional. However, he also understood that recruiting a teenage girl into a sniper unit would create complications with military command. Female soldiers were rare in the resistance movement, and snipers operated in extremely dangerous conditions with minimal support. Convincing his superiors to approve such an unconventional assignment would require careful planning and convincing arguments. Over the following weeks, Captain Nordahl worked with Lydia to develop her skills beyond simple marksmanship. Sniping in combat conditions required abilities that went far beyond accurate shooting. She needed to learn camouflage techniques, fieldcraft, stalking methods, and survival skills. Most importantly, she needed to develop the mental discipline required to remain motionless for hours while waiting for the perfect shot opportunity. Lydia proved to be an exceptionally quick learner. Her experience hunting in the Finnish forests had already taught her many of the skills that military snipers learn through months of training. She understood how to move quietly through different types of terrain, how to read animal behavior for signs of approaching danger, and how to remain completely still for extended periods. These abilities, combined with her extraordinary marksmanship, made her a formidable candidate for sniper operations. The captain also recognized that Lydia possessed psychological qualities that were essential for successful snipers. She demonstrated remarkable patience during training exercises, showing no signs of frustration when required to maintain shooting positions for hours without taking a shot. Her emotional control under pressure was exceptional, and she showed no hesitation when presented with realistic combat scenarios during training simulations. Perhaps most importantly, Lydia displayed the kind of calm, analytical thinking that allowed great snipers to make split-second decisions under extreme stress. During one training exercise, she identified an optimal shooting position that experienced military observers had overlooked, demonstrating tactical awareness that impressed everyone involved in her preparation. After 6 weeks of intensive training, Captain Nordahl felt confident that Lydia was ready for her first mission. However, he still needed to convince Colonel Henrik Virtanen, the regional resistance commander, to approve the deployment of such an unconventional operative. The colonel was known for his conservative approach to military operations and his skepticism about unproven tactics. The meeting between Colonel Virtanen and Lydia took place in an abandoned farmhouse that served as a temporary command center for resistance operations in the region. The colonel had reviewed reports about her training progress but remained doubtful about deploying a teenage female sniper in actual combat operations. He questioned whether she would be able to handle the psychological pressure of killing enemy soldiers, particularly in the close-quarter scenarios that snipers often encountered. Lydia addressed the colonel's concerns with a maturity that surprised everyone present. She explained that she understood the serious nature of the commitment she was making, and that she was prepared for the realities of combat. Her determination and clear understanding of what would be required convinced Colonel Virtanen that she deserved an opportunity to prove herself in the field. The colonel decided to approve a trial mission that would allow Lydia to demonstrate her abilities while minimizing risk to other resistance operations. Intelligence reports had identified a German observation post that was providing targeting information for artillery strikes on civilian areas. The post was located in a heavily fortified position that would be difficult to assault with conventional forces, but it might be vulnerable to a skilled sniper operating alone. Lydia would be given 48 hours to infiltrate the area around the observation post and eliminate key personnel if the opportunity presented itself. Success would prove that she could operate effectively in combat conditions. Failure would simply mean that alternative methods would need to be employed against the target. Either way, the mission would provide valuable information about her capabilities under real combat stress. As preparations for the mission began, Lydia felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that she had never experienced before. Everything she had learned during her training would be put to the ultimate test. The enemy soldiers she would be facing were experienced combat veterans who had fought their way across half of Europe. They would not be easy targets, and they would not hesitate to kill her if they discovered her presence. But Lydia also felt confident in her abilities, and in the preparation she had received from Captain Nordahl and his team. She had proven herself capable of extraordinary accuracy under controlled conditions. Now she would discover whether she could maintain that level of performance when lives depended on her success, including her own. The night before her departure, Lydia cleaned and checked her rifle one final time, ensuring that every component was functioning perfectly. She reviewed her mission parameters, studied maps of the target area, and mentally rehearsed the infiltration route she would use to approach the observation post. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of her transformation from a farm girl who hunted deer into something far more dangerous, a ghost who hunted men. Dawn was still 2 hours away when Lydia began her approach to the German observation post. She moved through the forest like a shadow, each step carefully placed to avoid breaking branches or disturbing the layer of fallen leaves that carpeted the ground. The weight of her rifle and equipment felt familiar after weeks of training, but the knowledge that enemy soldiers were somewhere ahead of her added a tension she had never experienced before. The observation post was located on a rocky outcrop that provided clear views across 3 kilometers of open countryside. Intelligence reports indicated that the position housed between 6 and 8 German soldiers who were directing artillery fire against resistance supply lines and civilian targets. The post was too well defended for a direct assault, but its elevated position also made it vulnerable to long-range precision fire from the surrounding hills. Lydia had studied the terrain for days using aerial reconnaissance photographs and reports from local hunters who knew the area well. She had identified several potential shooting positions that would provide clear lines of sight to the observation post while offering concealment and multiple escape routes. The key was getting close enough to observe the enemy's daily routines and identify high-value targets. Moving through the pre-dawn darkness, Lydia relied on her intimate knowledge of forest navigation to avoid German patrol routes that intelligence had mapped out over the previous weeks. The enemy maintained regular security sweeps around their position, but these patrols followed predictable patterns that could be avoided with careful timing and route selection. 3 hours before sunrise, Lydia reached her primary observation position, a cluster of large boulders surrounded by dense undergrowth approximately 800 meters from the German post. The position offered excellent concealment and a clear view of the target area through a natural gap in the forest canopy. She settled into the hide she had prepared during a reconnaissance mission 2 days earlier, covering herself with a camouflage tarp that would blend perfectly with the surrounding vegetation. As the first light of dawn began to illuminate the landscape, Lydia began her surveillance of the enemy position. Through her rifle scope, she could see the observation post clearly, a reinforced concrete bunker with multiple observation windows and communication equipment mounted on the roof. The structure was well designed for its defensive purpose, with thick walls that would stop small arms fire and carefully positioned openings that provided maximum visibility while minimizing exposure. At 0630 hours, Lydia observed the first signs of activity as German soldiers began their morning routine. 2 men emerged from the bunker to check communication equipment and scan the surrounding area with binoculars. Their movements were casual and confident, suggesting they felt secure in their fortified position. This would work to Lydia's advantage, as relaxed enemies were less likely to notice threats from unexpected directions. Over the next 4 hours, Lydia carefully documented the enemy's routine. She observed shift changes, noted the positions of guards, and identified which soldiers appeared to be officers based on their behavior and the deference shown by other personnel. The German unit followed a strict schedule that made their activities highly predictable. Exactly the kind of pattern that experienced snipers learned to exploit. The most valuable target was clearly the officer who appeared to be commanding the observation post. He was a tall man with distinctive gray hair, who spent considerable time studying maps and coordinating with other positions via radio. During her surveillance, Lydia observed him directing artillery fire against several different targets, including what appeared to be a civilian refugee convoy. This confirmed intelligence reports that the observation post was being used to coordinate attacks against non-military targets. By midday, Lydia had identified an optimal shooting opportunity that occurred every day at approximately 1400 hours. The commanding officer maintained a routine of stepping outside the bunker at this time to conduct a personal inspection of the surrounding area. During these inspections, he positioned himself in an exposed location that would provide a clear shot from Lydia's hide position. The range to the target was 847 meters according to Lydia's calculations. A challenging shot, but well within her proven capabilities. Wind conditions were favorable, with only light breezes that would have minimal effect on bullet trajectory. The afternoon sun would be behind her position, making it difficult for enemy observers to spot muzzle flash or scope glint. All factors seemed aligned for a successful engagement. However, Lydia also recognized that taking the shot would immediately reveal her position to the remaining German soldiers. The observation post housed at least 6 other enemy personnel who would respond aggressively to the loss of their commander. She needed to plan her escape route carefully and execute the shot with precision that would allow her to withdraw before enemy forces could organize a pursuit. At 1345 hours, Lydia began her final preparations for the engagement. She checked her rifle zero using a distant reference point, calculated precise adjustments for wind and elevation, and rehearsed the sequence of movements she would use to withdraw from her position after firing. Every detail had been planned and practiced, but she knew that actual combat conditions might require immediate adaptations to her carefully prepared plans. The target appeared exactly on schedule at 13:58 hours. The German officer emerged from the bunker carrying binoculars and a map case, moving with the confident stride of a man who felt completely secure in his position. He walked to his usual observation point and began scanning the surrounding countryside, completely unaware that he was being watched through the scope of a Finnish sniper's rifle. Lydia controlled her breathing and settled into her shooting position. The crosshairs of her scope centered on the officer's chest as she made final adjustments for the slight breeze that was moving through the trees around her position. Time seemed to slow as she applied steady pressure to the trigger, drawing on hundreds of hours of training that had prepared her for this moment. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the hillside. Through her scope, Lydia saw the German officer collapse immediately, the impact of the bullet spinning him around before he fell behind a concrete barrier. For a moment, the observation post remained silent as the other soldiers processed what had happened to their commander. Then chaos erupted as German voices began shouting orders and soldiers ran to defensive positions around the bunker. Lydia was already moving, having fired her shot and begun her withdrawal in one fluid motion that she had practiced countless times during training. She moved quickly but quietly away from her shooting position, following the escape route she had memorized during her reconnaissance. Behind her, the German soldiers were frantically searching for the source of the shot that had killed their officer. They fired randomly into the forest, spraying bullets in every direction as they tried to suppress an enemy they could not see. Their panic and disorganization confirmed that they had no idea where the shot had originated or how many attackers they were facing. Lydia covered the first kilometer of her escape route in less than 15 minutes, moving through terrain she knew intimately, while the Germans struggled to organize an effective pursuit. Their search efforts were handicapped by their unfamiliarity with the local forest and their assumption that they were dealing with a team of enemy soldiers rather than a single sniper. By 1500 hours, Lydia had reached a rally point where Captain Nordahl was waiting with extraction transportation. The captain's radio had been monitoring German communications, and intercepted messages confirmed that the enemy commander had been killed and that German forces were conducting a massive but unsuccessful search for the attackers. During her debrief, Lydia provided detailed information about the observation post's defenses, the remaining personnel, and potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited in future operations. Her successful mission had not only eliminated a high-value target, but had also provided valuable intelligence that would be useful for planning additional strikes against German positions. Captain Nordahl was impressed by Lydia's performance during her first combat mission. She had demonstrated exceptional skill under pressure, maintained discipline during the engagement, and successfully withdrew without being detected or pursued. Most importantly, she showed no signs of psychological stress or hesitation about the lethal nature of her assignment. Colonel Virtanen's response was equally positive when he received the mission report. The successful elimination of the German observation post commander had disrupted enemy artillery operations throughout the region, potentially saving civilian lives and protecting resistant supply lines. The mission had proven that unconventional tactics and operatives could be highly effective against well-defended enemy positions. More significantly, intercepted German communications indicated that the enemy was now concerned about the presence of skilled snipers in the region. They had increased security measures around their installations and were conducting additional patrols in areas they had previously considered secure. This shift in enemy behavior suggested that even a single successful sniper operation could have psychological effects that extended far beyond the immediate tactical impact. Lydia's success had transformed her from an experimental recruit into a proven combat operative. Colonel Virtanen authorized Captain Nordahl to begin planning additional missions that would take advantage of her demonstrated capabilities. However, both officers also recognized that her continued effectiveness would depend on maintaining the element of surprise that had made her first mission successful. The Germans would now be actively searching for the sniper who had killed their officer. They would increase security measures, alter their routines, and deploy countermeasures designed to detect and eliminate long-range threats. Future missions would be significantly more challenging, as Lydia faced an enemy that was now aware of her existence and actively hunting for her. But that night, As reports came in confirming the disruption of German artillery operations throughout the region, Lydia felt a satisfaction she had never experienced before. She had proven herself capable of making a real difference in the war, and she had discovered that she possessed the skills and temperament needed to excel at the most demanding form of military combat. The shy farm girl who had learned to shoot by hunting deer had been transformed into something far more dangerous, a weapon that her enemies would learn to fear. 3 months after her first successful mission, Lydia had become a ghost story that German soldiers told each other in whispered conversations around their campfires. They called her Der Waldgeist, the forest spirit, because she seemed to appear and disappear like smoke, leaving death in her wake. What terrified them most was that nobody had ever seen her. She was a presence felt only through the devastating accuracy of her rifle and the growing number of empty bunks in German barracks. The transformation, from farm girl to legendary sniper, had not been easy. Each mission had taught Lydia new lessons about survival. In an environment where the slightest mistake could mean capture or death, she had learned to think like her enemies, anticipating their reactions and staying ahead of their increasingly sophisticated efforts to hunt her down. The Germans had brought in specialized counter-sniper teams, deployed tracking dogs, and even used spotter aircraft to search for her positions. But somehow, she always managed to stay one step ahead. Captain Nordahl watched Lydia's evolution with a mixture of pride and concern. Her success rate was unprecedented. 14 confirmed kills in 3 months, including 2 high-ranking officers and several specialist personnel whose deaths had significantly disrupted German operations. However, he also noticed changes in her behavior that worried him. She had become quieter, more solitary, and sometimes seemed lost in thought during mission briefings. The psychological weight of her assignments was beginning to show, despite her continued professional excellence. The mission that would cement Lydia's legendary status began with intelligence reports about a German conference being held at a heavily fortified compound 20 kilometers behind enemy lines. High-ranking officers from multiple units were gathering to coordinate a major offensive against civilian population centers. The meeting represented an unprecedented opportunity to eliminate key German leadership, but the target location was protected by more security than any position Lydia had previously attacked. Colonel Vertinen initially hesitated to approve such an ambitious mission. The compound was surrounded by multiple layers of defense, including outer patrol lines, inner security checkpoints, and rooftop observation posts. German security personnel vastly outnumbered anything Lydia had faced before, and the compound's location made extraction extremely difficult. Failure would likely result in capture or death, and success would require penetrating deeper into enemy territory than any resistance operative had previously attempted. However, the potential strategic value of the mission was enormous. Intelligence indicated that the conference would include the regional German commander, several division-level officers, and specialist personnel responsible for coordinating attacks against civilian targets. Eliminating even a few of these individuals could disrupt German operations for months and potentially save thousands of civilian lives. After extensive planning sessions with Captain Nordahl and intelligence specialists, Lydia convinced Colonel Vertanen that the mission was feasible despite its extreme risks. She had identified an approach route that would allow her to reach a shooting position overlooking the compound, and she had developed contingency plans for multiple extraction scenarios. Most importantly, she had demonstrated through her previous missions that she could operate successfully in heavily defended enemy territory. The infiltration began during a severe winter storm that provided natural concealment for Lydia's movement through German-controlled territory. She traveled light, carrying only her rifle, minimal ammunition, emergency rations, and survival gear. The route to her target area required crossing 2 major roads, avoiding several German checkpoints, and navigating through terrain that was actively patrolled by enemy forces. It took Lydia 36 hours to reach her intended shooting position, moving only during periods of reduced visibility and spending daylight hours hidden in carefully prepared concealment sites. The compound became visible during the second day of her approach, and she was able to confirm intelligence reports about its layout and security arrangements through direct observation. The German conference was scheduled to take place in the compound's main building, which featured large windows facing the hillside where Lydia had positioned herself. The range to the target area was 1,150 meters, the longest shot she had ever attempted under combat conditions. At that distance, even small variations in wind or temperature could cause significant trajectory changes that would turn a perfect shot into a complete miss. Lydia spent 12 hours studying the target area through her rifle scope, noting the positions of guards, identifying potential shooting opportunities, and calculating the precise adjustments needed for such an extreme-range engagement. She observed several high-ranking German officers arriving for the conference, including the regional commander whose elimination was the primary mission objective. The optimal shooting opportunity came during the second day of the conference, when the German officers gathered in a large conference room with windows facing Lydia's position. Through her scope, she could clearly see the participants seated around a large table with maps and documents spread across its surface. The regional commander was easily identifiable by his distinctive uniform and the deference shown by other officers in the room. Wind conditions had been variable throughout the day, but at 14:30 hours, Lydia detected a brief period of calm that would provide optimal conditions for the extreme-range shot. She had been tracking wind patterns for hours, and her experience told her that this might be her only opportunity before weather conditions deteriorated further. Lydia settled into her shooting position and began her final preparations for the engagement. The crosshairs of her scope centered on the German commander's upper torso as she made minute adjustments for elevation and windage. At 1,150 meters, the target appeared small even through her magnified scope, requiring absolute precision in every aspect of the shooting process. The rifle fired with its familiar sharp crack, and Lydia immediately began tracking the bullet's flight time to the distant target. At such extreme range, it took nearly 2 seconds for the projectile to reach the conference room window. Through her scope, she watched the glass explode as her bullet found its mark, and saw the German commander collapse forward onto the conference table. Panic erupted in the conference room as other German officers dove for cover and guards rushed to respond to the attack. However, Lydia was already executing her withdrawal plan, moving quickly away from her shooting position before the enemy could determine where the shot had originated. The extreme range of the engagement worked to her advantage, as German security forces had no idea that the attack had come from such a distant location. The successful elimination of the regional German commander sent shockwaves through enemy forces throughout the region. Intercepted communications revealed that the Germans were implementing massive security changes and had brought in additional counterintelligence specialists to hunt for the sniper who had penetrated their most secure facility. The psychological impact of the attack extended far beyond its immediate tactical value. But Lydia's legend truly began to grow because of what happened during her extraction from the mission area. German forces had mobilized hundreds of soldiers to search for the sniper, deploying tracking teams, aircraft, and specially trained counter-sniper units. They established roadblocks, conducted house-to-house searches, and interrogated local civilians in their determination to capture or kill the operative who had struck at the heart of their command structure. For 5 days, Lydia evaded the massive manhunt while making her way back to friendly territory. She moved at night, hid during daylight hours, and used her intimate knowledge of the local terrain to avoid German search teams. Several times she was forced to remain motionless for hours while enemy patrols passed within meters of her concealment, but her training and natural instincts kept her undetected throughout the extraction. On the 4th night of her escape, Lydia encountered a German patrol that had discovered her temporary hiding place and was systematically searching the area around her position. Unable to avoid contact, she was forced to eliminate 2 German soldiers with her sidearm before continuing her withdrawal. The bodies were discovered the following morning, adding to the growing legend of the invisible sniper who could kill at any range and disappear without a trace. When Lydia finally reached the extraction point where Captain Nordahl was waiting, she had been operating behind enemy lines for 8 days with minimal food and no communication with friendly forces. Despite the extreme stress and physical demands of the mission, she remained alert and professional during her debrief, providing detailed intelligence about German security measures and potential vulnerabilities for future operations. The strategic impact of Lydia's mission extended far beyond the elimination of the regional German commander. Her successful penetration of the heavily fortified compound had forced the enemy to divert significant resources to security measures that reduced their offensive capabilities. German units were now operating under increased restrictions that slowed their movements and made them less effective in combat operations. More importantly, the psychological effect of Lydia's operations had begun to undermine German morale throughout the region. Enemy soldiers were increasingly reluctant to expose themselves in areas where the legendary female sniper might be operating. Officers changed their routines frequently and avoided predictable patterns that might make them vulnerable to long-range attacks. Intelligence reports indicated that the Germans had developed an almost superstitious fear of the sniper they could not identify or locate. Some units reported difficulty maintaining discipline as soldiers became nervous about assignments that required operating in areas where previous attacks had occurred. The mere possibility of encountering the invisible marksman was affecting German combat effectiveness even when Lydia was not actively operating in their area. Colonel Vertinen recognized that Lydia had evolved beyond her original role as a specialized operative to become a strategic asset whose psychological impact rivaled her tactical effectiveness. However, he also understood that her continued success was attracting increasingly dangerous attention from German counterintelligence forces. Each mission increased the risk that sophisticated enemy countermeasures would eventually locate and eliminate the resistance's most effective operative. The decision was made to expand Lydia's role beyond solo sniper operations to include training other resistance fighters in advanced marksmanship and fieldcraft techniques. Her combat experience and proven methods could be passed on to new recruits who might eventually become equally effective operatives. This approach would multiply the impact of her knowledge while reducing the risk associated with depending on a single irreplaceable operative. But even as plans were developed for Lydia's expanded training role, intelligence reports continued to arrive, describing the growing German obsession with locating and eliminating the sniper they had never seen but had learned to fear. Counterintelligence specialists from Berlin had been assigned to the case, and substantial rewards had been offered for information leading to her capture. The hunt for the legendary female sniper had become a matter of German military pride as much as strategic necessity. Lydia understood that her reputation had become both her greatest asset and her most dangerous liability. The fear she inspired in enemy forces multiplied the effectiveness of her operations, but it also ensured that increasingly sophisticated resources would be dedicated to hunting her down. Every future mission would be more dangerous than the last as the Germans developed better techniques for detecting and countering sniper operations. Standing at the window of the resistance safe house where she was temporarily based, Lydia watched the sun set over the forest where she had learned to hunt as a child. In less than a year, she had transformed from a farm girl with exceptional marksmanship skills into a legendary figure whose very existence struck fear into the hearts of enemy soldiers. The transformation had come at a personal cost that she was only beginning to understand, but it had also proven that sometimes the most effective weapon in warfare was not the biggest army or the most advanced technology. It was the determination of one individual who refused to accept defeat.